You remember Barnabas comes to check things out. He encourages them. He's involved in ministering to them, and he realizes he needed help. And so he goes, he finds Saul of Tarsus. He remembered him. He brings him to Antioch. And we're told in verses 25 to verse 26, and when he had found him, he brought him to Antioch. So it was that for a whole year they assembled with the church and taught a great many people. And the disciples were first called Christians in Antioch. So in the context of the gathered church, they taught the Word of God. They sought to ground them and to establish them in the doctrines of the faith. There was a hunger for the Word of God among these people. And this church was built upon, it was devoted to the public ministry of the Word of God. And we saw how this comes out not only here, but in chapter 13, and also in later references to the church at Antioch. Well, that was the focus last time. But now putting behind us all of that review, and this morning and the time remaining, I want us to take up where we left off. You remember I said there are at least, I'd say at least, it depends on how you look at it, at least 7 characteristics of a God-glorifying, spiritually maturing, spirit-controlled, world-impacting church that we can see in the church at Antioch. We've considered one of them thus far. This morning I hope to cover numbers 2 and 3. So, thinking back, remember that when word got back to the church in Jerusalem of what was happening, they sent Barnabas to Antioch to check things out. Is this truly a work of God that is happening here? We have this very interesting statement in verse 23. Have you ever noticed this? It says, when he came and had seen the grace of God, he was glad. So when he arrived there, he saw something that made him glad, that encouraged him. Well, what was it he saw? It says he saw the grace of God. But now, what does that mean? How can you see the grace of God? Well, the idea, I think, obviously is that he saw the evidences of God's grace, God's Spirit at work in this place among these people and in the lives of these people. And this is what convinced him that God is really doing something here. This is really a work of God here. It convinced him that this was a situation worth giving attention to and giving encouragement to and seeking to give help to. But now this raises a very important question. What does the grace of God look like in that sense? Or what does a true work of the Spirit of God look like? How do we distinguish between a real work of God and that which is merely a counterfeit or superficial religious excitement? Or perhaps even the work of the devil, masquerading as an angel of light, as Paul says in 2 Corinthians. How do we discern if the Spirit of God is truly at work in a situation and among a people? That's a very important question. It's a very important question when we're talking about a church plant. And when we evaluate, we say, is God really doing something here? You remember, it's not really, it's Christ who plants churches. Now, he does that through churches, but it's Christ who raises up and plants churches. Is Christ really doing something here? Is this really a work of God's Spirit here? It's true with regard to us as a congregation. If you've been here for very long, you know what we've experienced in the last couple of years and how we've exploded really in growth, and lots of new people are coming into our church. So it's a question for us to ask ourselves, is this really a work of the Spirit of God that's happening among us? And how do we discern that? How do we know if it is or not? Well, the great Jonathan Edwards once wrote an important treatise addressing this very question. It's entitled The Distinguishing Marks of a Work of the Spirit of God. As many of you know, Edwards lived and ministered during the colonial period in America, in a time that's been called in history the Great Awakening, a time of tremendous revival that swept throughout not only New England, but throughout all of the colonies, the whole of the American colonies. Well, as is often the case, there were people, even professing Christian pastors, who criticized and attacked the revival. And so Edwards wrote a number of works in defense